Before the story begins, do me a favor. If you enjoy deep space mysteries, impossible creatures, and humans doing the one thing the galaxy never expects, tap the like button, subscribe for more HFY science fiction, and tell me in the comments what you would do if compassion made you an enemy of the stars. Now let's begin. The galaxy agreed on very few things, but one belief was universal and absolute. If the predators of Virex had not existed, empires would still stand. They were not myths. Myths were safe stories recited after the danger had passed. The Virex predators were living, catalogued extinction events, biological titans whose mere migration patterns had erased civilizations older than most stars. Every major faction kept their images sealed behind black clearances and dead men's protocols. Even their name was spoken only in strategic briefings, usually followed by silence. So when Elias Rowe's ship intercepted a fragmented distress signal drifting near the Virex quarantine line, logic demanded he burn his engines in the opposite direction. Instead he slowed. Elias was human, which the galaxy had reluctantly acknowledged as a problem all its own. Humans were not the strongest species or the smartest, but they possessed a fatal flaw no one had found a way to regulate. They sometimes cared more about why something suffered than what might happen if they helped. His small exploration vessel hovered at the edge of a red-lit system that no chart encouraged travel through. The planet below was listed as uninhabitable, hostile, and officially condemned. Its surface pulsed with heat scars and electromagnetic storms, and somewhere beneath those clouds lived creatures so dangerous that entire armadas had died trying to observe them from orbit. The distress signal pulsed again, weak, erratic, artificial. Elias exhaled slowly and adjusted course. He traced the signal to a scarred ravine where alien transport wreckage smoked among cracked stone. The ship's markings identified the crew as contracted Xena hunters, mercenaries licensed to handle creatures that sovereign militaries feared to touch. That knowledge alone twisted Elias's stomach. Xena hunters were rarely sent to retrieve. They were sent to remove. He found them deeper inside a portable containment rig, arguing loudly in 3 languages over biometric readings spiking off the scale. The cage at the center of their camp was smaller than it had any right to be. Its alloy bars glowed faintly from internal heat, and inside it lay a creature that made every survival instinct in Elias's body scream. The cub was no larger than a wolf, but every inch of it radiated predatory design. Layered bone plating beneath dark, shifting hide, claws curved like weapons refined by millennia of success. Its eyes opened as Elias approached, luminous and unfocused, and it released a low, fractured sound that vibrated through the air rather than it. Fear hit him instantly, sharp and undeniable. Then he saw the restraints. Bands dug into plated limbs still too small to fight back. One segment of the cub's side was scorched, the injury crude and painful. It was panting, not in aggression but in exhaustion. A mercenary caught Elias staring and laughed. First one you've seen in the flesh, huh? Don't worry. It won't make it off-world. Elias forced himself to look away from the cub long enough to meet the speaker's eyes. You issued a distress signal. Yeah, the alien replied casually. Containment spike surged. We're logging the kill on site, then sterilizing the area. Protocol. Elias already knew the protocol. Galactic doctrine was simple. No Virex offspring were permitted to mature. Ever. Killing a cub was considered mercy, for everyone else. The cub shifted again, producing a thin, broken cry that scraped across frequencies Elias's suit barely registered. The sound wasn't loud, but it was searching. Something inside him went still. How far is the mother? Elias asked quietly. The mercenary's expression hardened. Close enough that you should leave. That thing's a beacon. When she wakes fully, nothing stays alive within 5 systems. Elias's fingers curled slowly at his side. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't threaten anyone. He just stared at the injured cub and felt an old human instinct surface. One that had driven medics into war zones and parents into burning buildings without thinking twice. They have laws, Elias said almost to himself. Even predators. The mercenaries laughed again, louder this time. One of them turned toward the cage, adjusting a device clearly built for execution. Doesn't matter. Fear wrote the only law that counts. That was the moment Elias realized there was no version of this encounter where he left unchanged. He moved before fear could argue otherwise. The next moments shattered into sound and motion. Alarms shrieking, weapons discharging, the cage flaring as Elias overloaded its lock with a manual surge that nearly fried his suit. The cub recoiled at first, striking blindly, then froze as Elias placed himself between it and the firing line. "Easy," he murmured absurdly. "I've got you." He didn't know why he said it. He only knew it was true. By the time his ship broke atmosphere, hull scarred and engines screaming, every galactic relay in the sector had flagged his identity. Criminal. Liability. Traitor. Far below, deep within the planet's mantle, something ancient opened its eyes. Elias didn't feel the moment the mother awakened. But across the stars entire civilizations did. And she had already found his scent. Elias did not sleep after the jump. The cub lay curled in the recessed cargo cradle, its wounded side pressed carefully against the warmth of the engine housing as if instinct had guided it there. Elias had sealed off the rest of the hold, dimmed the lighting, and scrubbed the air with every medical sterilizer his ship possessed. None of it eased the tightness in his chest. He kept replaying the moment he had turned back toward the cage, knowing with perfect clarity that the galaxy would never forgive him for it. Warning glyphs flared along the navigation display as his systems finished decoding incoming data. 14 separate warrants had been issued in under 3 minutes. Quarantine violation. Interference with sanctioned extermination. Endangerment of sentient civilizations. The charges stacked until the screen ran out of space. Elias silenced them with a tired flick of his wrist. The cub stirred when the engines adjusted output, lifting its head just enough for one luminous eye to fix on him. He froze, every muscle tense. Up close, the creature was more terrifying and more fragile than he had expected. Its claws could shred alloy, yet they trembled as it tested the unfamiliar gravity of the ship. "You're safe for now," he said, unsure whether the words were for the cub or himself. The cub made a soft, broken sound. It was no longer a cry. It was closer to a question. Elias swallowed and opened the portable medical kit he'd anchored to the deck. He worked slowly, announcing each movement, keeping his voice steady despite the way his pulse thundered in his ears. When the cub recoiled from the unfamiliar instruments, he stopped immediately. When it allowed him closer, he adjusted his posture to appear smaller, less threatening, just as he'd learned with animals on Earth long before he'd ever known the stars held monsters worse than nightmares. The wound was ugly but clean. Energy scoring, not dismemberment. Deliberate. Controlled. "They didn't need to hurt you," Elias muttered as he sealed the injury with a polymer mesh rated for extreme heat. The cub tensed, then relaxed as the pain dulled. Its breathing eased, and something in Elias's chest loosened with it. The ship lurched as it slipped into a secondary drift lane, power signatures masked as much as they could be. It wouldn't be enough. He knew that too. Whatever forces tracked the cub, they would not be fooled long. The galactic net confirmed his fear moments later. Emergency bulletins flooded open frequencies. Entire systems were lighting up with collision warnings, spatial anomalies, and emergency jumps gone wrong. The pattern was unmistakable even without full data. Something vast was moving with purpose, and nothing dared place itself in its path. Elias closed his eyes. "She's awake." The cub's head snapped up at the word, eyes brightening with sudden focus. It emitted a sound that resonated through the hull, subtle but powerful enough to make instruments flicker. Elias stared as the ship's internal gravity stabilized itself, correcting without command. "You can feel her," he whispered. The cub edged closer, pressing its head lightly against his leg. The contact was hesitant, testing. Elias did not move. Fear flared through him again, but it was different now, threaded with something warmer, heavier. Responsibility. He rerouted power, pushing the ship harder than its frame liked, and set a course that avoided populated lanes. It was a futile courtesy, but he couldn't shake the instinct to minimize collateral damage. The galaxy might decide he was an extinction-level mistake, but he refused to make that decision easy. They were intercepted near the edge of an uninhabited nebula. A Xenahunter cruiser dropped out of jump space ahead of him, weapons charged, hull bearing the same insignia as the mercenaries he'd fled. A transmission punched through his shields before he could reroute. "You are carrying a Virex juvenile," the commander said, voice stripped of curiosity. "Power down. This is your final warning." Elias glanced at the cub, then back to the screen. "You already lost it," he replied evenly. "Walk away." The alien's eyes hardened. "For that thing? No species is worth this risk." "That's where you're wrong," Elias said. "You're just afraid to find out." The cruiser opened fire. Elias twisted hard, dumping coolant and chaff, using the nebula's interference to scramble targeting. The first volley clipped his shields and tore plating from his port side. He felt the impact through the deck, heard the cub hiss in alarm. "I know," he said urgently, bracing himself as he dropped the ship into an uncontrolled descent through ionized gas. "I know, stay down." A second barrage never came. Something vast eclipsed the stars beyond the cockpit. Sensors spiked into meaningless numbers before cutting out entirely. The cruiser's targeting beam flickered, then vanished as the ship was torn sideways, its structure folding in on itself like soft metal. Elias stared in stunned silence as fragments scattered, glowing briefly before cooling into darkness. The nebula rippled. Then, slowly, deliberately, the shape emerged. It was larger than the legends had hinted, its form woven from shadow and light, armored in plates that reflected nothing. The mother did not roar. She did not announce her presence. She simply existed, occupying space with the finality of a law that could not be challenged. Elias's breath caught, his hands lifting instinctively in a gesture that would mean nothing to something like her. The cub stepped forward, placing itself between Elias and the void, and released a clear, resonant call. The mother turned. Her gaze fixed not on the ship but on him. For a long, impossible moment nothing happened. Then she moved, adjusting her vast form until she positioned herself along Elias's flight path, her presence a living wall between him and the rest of the galaxy. The meaning was unmistakable. He was no longer prey. And whatever he had become instead would change everything. The galaxy did not learn the truth all at once. It learned in fragments, through reports that disagreed with one another but shared the same conclusion. Something had gone catastrophically wrong, and a human was at the center of it. Elias discovered this while drifting in the wake of the mother's passage. His instruments remained unreliable, flickering between impossible readings and total blankness, yet one thing was consistent. The space ahead of him was empty. Not abandoned, not quiet. Clear. Whatever routes the mother had crossed were now avoided by every intelligent species capable of fear. He should have felt triumph. Instead he felt small. The cub slept at last, stretched along the deck in a mimicry of his earlier posture, its breathing slow and even. The wound was healing with unsettling speed. When Elias moved, it shifted slightly toward him without waking, as though some instinct tied its awareness to his presence alone. He wondered what that meant and whether he deserved it. A secure channel finally forced its way through his defenses, prioritized by probability algorithms he hadn't written. The Galactic Council's seal flared briefly before stabilizing. The speaker was a Valar archivist, her species known for measuring emotion in micro-expressions rather than words. "Human Elias Rowe," she said, "you are in violation of 17 emergency existential accords." "I imagine I am," Elias replied calmly. Her mandibles clicked in a sound that might have been irritation. "Entire task forces have withdrawn or been destroyed attempting to approach your location. You are to explain immediately why the Virex matriarch is escorting you through controlled space." Elias looked past the display through reinforced glass, toward the mother's vast outline coiling protectively along his projected vector. He chose his next words with care. "Because I returned her child." The archivist was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "Her species does not recognize reciprocity. They recognize intent," Elias said. Saying it aloud made the truth settle more firmly inside him. "That's the difference." The transmission cut without dismissal. Elias suspected the council needed time to argue about reality before they could argue with him. He didn't get that time. A cluster of warships emerged along the rim of the system, heavy hulls, sovereign designations, weapons charged. Not hunters or mercenaries this time, but a coalition fleet built for annihilation. Their presence tightened something in Elias's chest. No species assembled that volume of firepower unless fear had overridden restraint entirely. The cub woke as the ships appeared, rising to its feet with a low, vibrating growl that made the deck thrummed. Elias placed a hand on its shoulder before thinking better of it. The cub stilled instantly, turning its head to him with bright, focused attention. "Don't," Elias whispered, not sure whether he was asking the cub or the universe. The fleet opened fire. This time the mother did not wait. She flowed forward, not charging so much as becoming, her presence warping the void around her. Energy blooms vanished against her armor as if swallowed. One cruiser disintegrated outright when it crossed the curvature of her mass, torn apart not by weapons, but by proximity to something that did not acknowledge its existence. Elias watched in awed horror as the remaining ships scrambled, formations breaking as survival instincts shattered command structure. The mother did not pursue them with indiscriminate violence. She intercepted only those vectors that threatened Elias's path, striking with precision that implied calculation rather than rage. Minutes later, nothing hostile remained within range. Silence fell again, heavy and absolute. Elias realized then that the galaxy had misunderstood these predators from the beginning. Empires had fallen not because the Virex were mindless destructors, but because no one had ever approached them without a weapon raised or fear blazing like a signal fire. He felt a shift run through the ship as the mother adjusted her position once more, settling into an escort formation that no navigation algorithm could explain. His path forward was clear and guarded. Another transmission request arrived, this one unsecured. "Human," a different voice said. "Older. One. Stand down your ally." Elias felt a flicker of dry humor. "She doesn't take orders from me." "Then call her off," the voice pressed. "If she advances any further, the Accords collapse." Elias looked at the cub, now standing with practiced confidence beside him, no longer trembling. "The Accords collapsed the moment you decided a child could be executed for safety," he said quietly. "All I did was refuse to look away." The channel cut. Time passed in an uneasy rhythm. News bled in through filtered streams, trade routes abandoned, border wars paused by mutual dread, ancient rivalries frozen by a shared realization that something far worse than any enemy now listened to the stars. Human space became an axis of speculation. Some believed Elias was a hostage. Others whispered that humanity had found a way to leash the dark. Both were wrong. The cub grew more active with each cycle, exploring the ship with unnerving intelligence, learning controls, patterns, routines. It watched Elias constantly, not with hunger but with recognition. When he slept, it curled near him, radiating warmth that chased away the cold ache of isolation. Elias began to understand that this was not protection born of debt alone. Something deeper had anchored between them, an unspoken agreement written in survival and trust. The mother altered course without warning days later, drawing them toward a region of space marked on no chart. Elias's systems refused to resolve it, returning only static and error symbols. He didn't fight the change. As the stars thinned ahead, Elias felt anticipation replace fear. Whatever awaited them there was not meant for weapons or councils. It was meant for witnesses. And he was beginning to realize the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The region the mother guided them into did not obey familiar physics. Stars blurred into distant embers and space itself seemed to breathe, contracting and relaxing in slow, deliberate pulses. Elias felt the change before his instruments admitted it, a pressure behind his eyes that came with the certainty that he had crossed a threshold no explorer had ever been meant to chart. The ship slowed without input, held gently in a gravitational pocket formed by the mother's immense presence. Ahead, structures emerged from the void, not built but grown. Vast arcs of dark mineral interlaced with living matter, suspended in defiance of decay. This was no nest in the primitive sense the galaxy imagined. It was a sanctuary ancient beyond measurement. "The cradle," Elias whispered, though no language he knew had a word large enough. The cub responded with a resonant tone, stronger now, confident. Others answered. Movement rippled across the expanse as shapes unfolded from the shadows. More of them. Not the endless swarm feared by legend, but a small, deliberate assembly of titans, each one capable of ending civilizations and yet gathered with restrained stillness. These were the elders, minds that had watched stars form and collapse without interference. Elias felt their attention settle on him like a weight. He stepped away from the console, palms open, heart steadying through sheer refusal to yield. Fear would be honest here, but deference felt more truthful. They thought you were monsters, he said quietly to the empty space, to everything. They never wondered why. The mother angled her colossal form, positioning him and the cub clearly within the elder's view. The cub moved to stand at his side, touching him briefly with the crown of its head. The gesture tightened Elias's throat. A presence brushed his thoughts, not invasive, not commanding, but inquisitive. Images followed. Fleets burning. Worlds poisoned preemptively. Children culled because one day they might grow dangerous. Through it all, the same constant signal pulsed. Fear broadcast so loudly it became violence. Elias answered without words. He let his memories surface unguarded. The hesitation at the cage, the recognition of pain, the instinct that had overruled reason. Not arrogance. Not defiance. Just. The presence receded. One of the elder titans shifted, its form folding inward slightly, an echo of a bow. The others followed, slow and deliberate. Elias stood in stunned silence as comprehension crashed down on him. This was not submission. It was acknowledgement. The mother's attention returned to him, warmer now, layered with something that felt almost like approval. The cub vocalized softly, pride and belonging vibrating through the air. Beyond the sanctuary's bounds, the galaxy convulsed. Council delegations arrived in numbers bordering on desperation, holding position at a distance no closer than they dared. Hails poured in, veering wildly between pleas and threats, diplomacy collapsing under the weight of reality. Elias ignored most of it until a single channel cut cleanly through the noise, marked not by authority but by caution. Human Elias Rowe, the voice said, we require terms. Elias drew a steady breath. This was the moment he had been orbiting since the ravine, whether he had known it or not. He opened the channel wide, broadcasting not only his image, but the sanctuary beyond him, the titans watching in silence. You don't get terms, he said evenly. You get understanding. Silence answered, taut and listening. You feared them because you never tried to listen, Elias continued. You attacked because you assumed survival meant dominance. It doesn't. It means restraint. It means not killing something just because one day it could kill you back. The council's representatives shifted visibly, some in discomfort, others in disbelief. The Virex are not your enemies, Elias said. They are not your weapons either. They are not interested in rule. They are interested in balance. And they've chosen not to erase you. That last truth landed harder than any threat. What does humanity gain from this? Someone demanded. Elias glanced at the cub, now watching the assembled faces with open curiosity. Nothing exclusive, he answered. That's the point. The mother moved then, extending a portion of her vast form around Elias's vessel in a clear, unmistakable gesture of protection. The elders echoed her motion, their collective presence forming an invisible boundary that no ship could cross without permission. A declaration carried across the sanctuary and beyond, resonating not as sound but as certainty. Elias understood its meaning without translation. The human who had returned the child was under their guard. Any who threatened him would be answered. Elias exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling into his bones. He had not intended to become a line the galaxy could not cross, but intention no longer mattered. As the council's transmissions faltered and withdrew, one truth remained unspoken but unavoidable. Humanity had been marked. Not as conquerors. As kin worth protecting. And the galaxy was only beginning to understand the consequences. Years passed, but for Elias, time had a peculiar elasticity in the company of the Virex. The cub had grown into a towering apex of sinew and plated bone, far larger than its mother had been when he first saw her. Yet it retained the same bright intelligence in its eyes, the same instinctive tether to him that no distance, no stellar anomaly could sever. The galaxy had whispered about him in fragments, building legends from rumor and dread, but he no longer moved with concern for recognition. Survival, for him, had become a matter of presence, attention, and choice, the fundamental human weapons no empire could manufacture. The mother's guardianship had never wavered. She patrolled the fringes of known space silently, a shadow that kept fleets at bay, her massive form an implicit warning that the cost of aggression could never be calculated in conventional terms. Elias often observed her from his ship's bridge, noting the precision of her movements, the subtle corrections she made to maintain protective orbit around him and the now mature cub. He had come to understand her as one might understand an old sentinel, neither friend nor enemy, but a being whose loyalty could not be bought or commanded, only earned. Despite the calm, tension simmered elsewhere. Trade routes adjusted, outposts relocated, and entire fleets were repurposed merely to monitor the human who had unmade fear itself. Diplomatic envoys approached cautiously, some requesting passage, others delivering veiled threats. Elias received them all with quiet patience, using the same skill that had saved him and the cub long ago: clear reasoning, honesty, and the unshakable certainty that no threat warranted preemptive cruelty. When the cub moved among him, guiding his interactions with a subtle awareness, he realized how intertwined their fates had become, not as master and pet, but as companions who had survived horrors together. One day, a ripple in the galactic network signaled an anomaly. A fleet, larger than any he had seen since the events on Virex, approached human-claimed sectors under the banner of an unknown coalition. This force moved with audacious confidence, calculating that the legends surrounding him and the Virex were exaggeration. Elias's heart, now steady from years of exposure to peril, clenched nonetheless. The cub shifted beside him, muscles tensing in anticipation. It had grown into a warrior capable of vast destruction, yet it deferred to Elias, waiting for the human to choose the path forward. Elias did not hesitate. He activated long-dormant communication channels, sending a broadcast to the approaching fleet. "You do not understand what you approach," he said calmly, voice steady even as sensors tracked thousands of hull signatures converging in coordinated vectors. "Your calculations are incomplete. Leave now or face consequences that your empire cannot comprehend." The fleet paused, sensors struggling against interference. They could not see the mother nor anticipate her presence, yet the intensity of the warning carried through the network with a resonance that was almost physical. Sensors detected the shifting of gravitational anomalies and unrecorded energy signatures, but no conventional weapon could measure the scope of the threat. The fleet commander hesitated, arrogance meeting uncertainty for the first time. Then the mother moved. Slowly at first, emerging from the void with the calculated weight of inevitability. The surrounding space rippled under her presence, stellar light bending against her contours, debris and void matter rearranging in deference. The cub stepped forward, mirroring her precision and displaying its own mastery of both instinct and acquired intelligence. Elias stood between them, utterly human, yet entirely unthreatened, an axis around which the galaxy's most dangerous predators now oriented themselves. The fleet responded, opening fire. Energy lances flared against shields designed to withstand star core detonations. Their weapons disintegrated harmlessly as the mother swept through their formation, her movement deliberate, striking only where aggression was directed. The cub moved with complementary precision, disabling systems without loss of life, herding vessels like an unseen shepherd shaping a cosmic flock. Elias realized with grim satisfaction that the galaxy's greatest killers could be guided, restrained, and given purpose through mutual understanding, a human concept no other species had grasped with such clarity. The fleet commander activated full-scale weaponry, but it was too late. The mother extended herself across the void, her presence so vast it rendered calculations meaningless. The cub moved at his side, a perfect extension of that protection. Ships collapsed under invisible pressures, engines tearing themselves apart to escape forces they could not perceive. Elias remained calm, knowing that he had orchestrated nothing. He had only refused to act in fear. The result was not chaos but clarity. Humans did not command destruction. They inspired it through conviction and choice. As the last vessel limped away, systems failing, Elias allowed himself a long exhale. The cub pressed against him, its scaled head touching his chest in recognition. The mother retreated slightly, returning to her sentinel pattern, but her presence remained unmistakable. For the first time, Elias allowed himself to see the full consequence of his actions. He had not merely survived. He had changed the parameters of survival itself for his species. The galaxy would never forget him, not because of fear but because of example. Humans were no longer incidental, no longer pawns or potential victims. They were a species that could act with clarity, empathy, and courage, and in doing so, could bend even the most terrifying forces to coexistence rather than annihilation. Elias understood at last that the legacy he had forged was not built on weapons, but on choice, the ultimate human advantage. He turned to the cub, now fully grown, and allowed a rare smile to pass his lips. "We've done more than survive," he said softly. "We've taught them to see us differently." The cub tilted its head as if acknowledging the statement, and Elias felt the weight of unspoken agreement settle over them both. Above, in the void between stars, the mother maintained her watch. The galaxy would test its patience, push its limits, and challenge its order. But Elias and the cub had learned the truth. Nothing could undo what had been earned through courage, compassion, and unwavering intent. Humanity had not simply endured, it had transcended expectation. And somewhere beyond the measured chaos of distant fleets, beyond the corridors of the Council and the whispers of ancient empires, the galaxy felt the first tremor of a new reality. One species had chosen not just to survive, but to claim its place through the one power no predator or warship could ever truly deny, the indomitable will to act rightly, even when every voice demanded otherwise. Elias's eyes tracked the stars, the cub at his side, the mother guarding from the shadows. The universe was vast and unforgiving, but for the first time he knew humanity was untouchable, not because of weapons or fear but because of the choice they had made. And in that choice lay a promise more enduring than any empire: compassion, courage, and the certainty that one human acting rightly could rewrite the rules of the galaxy. The stars stretched endlessly before them, but for Elias the path was clear. They would face whatever came next, together, untouchable and unbowed.